His hands, independent of him, wove backward, unmaking the spell. And he saw it. A hecact glyph, insufficiently drawn. One of the staffs branching from the upper orb was unconnected, a space of 2 microns separating the spear of the line from the curve of the circle. It was what made the astromancer discipline such a difficult one. Mastery required total precision, total focus. When one used arithmancy to shape time and space, even the slightest error mattered. And with overlapping hexes this complicated, errors were easy to make. Even musing on Trazyn, though it was but a stray thought in a tertiary subroutine, had been enough to force an error. This was why he'd been living the past 20 minutes over and over again. 3 years, cumulative, to get from the first plinth to the object that lay within. Orokin took a breath. Unnecessary biologically, but critical to focus, and redrew the hex. Then he activated the working and reached inside, felt his metal hand, cold and gentle, close around the artifact and bring it out of the field. A perfect tetrahedral pyramid, shaped from living metal. Glyphs glistened on its surface, iridescent in the low light, veins of crystalline substance marbling through its structure. Puzzle box, celestial compass, key, depending on what you believed. It may be any of these things. And he believed it was much, much more.
"Ah, the Astarium Mysterious," breathed Orokin.
"Interesting," replied Trazyn. "I had wondered what that was."
"Archivist."
Orokin paired the greeting with a polite bow. It achieved the proper depth and angle for a greeting of equal colleagues, but remained just shallow enough to communicate contempt.
"Astromancer,"
said Trazyn, returning the bow with a nod. The proper gesture for an overlord greeting guests on his own world, serving as both welcome and a warning. It was, consequently, identical to the dueling bow.
"Had you announced your arrival, I would have arranged an honor guard. A figure of your reputation should not be wandering here alone." "Kind and proper, my colleague. Kind and proper."
Orokin moved sideways, insectile.
"But I would not trouble you, especially since, for a planetary overlord, you are so often away from Solemnis."
They were circling each other now, pretense dissolving. They'd long been rivals, back to the flesh times, and Trazyn had frequently imagined what it would be like to land a blow on the diviner. But Orokin's movements unnerved him. The curse of biotransference had made parodies of them all, but none more extreme than he and Orokin. While Trazyn had been remade into a hunched, hooded thing, a scholar eternally at his work, Orokin's slight frame had twisted to reflect the soul within. He was all things quick and venomous. His face and headdress recalled a hooded serpent. His curled tail, segmented black armor, and spindly limbs echoed the waste scorpions of the old capital. Divination orbs ran down his spine, swirling with cloudy energy. A single baleful ocular, mocking the foresight the cryptex claimed to possess, gleamed with haughty malice.
"Thievery is beneath you, Orokin. Hand back the trinket and perhaps we can continue your research under supervision. After all, I, of all beings, can understand the wish to covertly acquire—" "Understand?" Orokin snapped. "To understand is not in you, Trazyn. You're a bird building a nest with shiny things. A child with a rock collection. You want things simply to have them. Their true meaning, their use is lost on you."
"Hurtful," chided Trazyn. He dipped his obliterator so it pointed at the device in Orokin's hand.
"Even if true, I see no reason why that allows you to steal my things." "You stole it first, from the Omunos dynasty." "The Omunos dynasty is not but inert metal now. You can't steal from the dead. That's called archaeology." The point is to memorize, learn, study what came before us. We look to the past to navigate the future. I prefer to look to the future to navigate the future, said Orican. For instance, there were 27 times I could have attacked just now, but none would have got past your guard. Indeed. But 28 is a slaying blow. It came faster than Trazen thought possible. He slowed his chronosense, but it did no good. Orican leapt to his left and conjured his star-headed staff. In Trazen's enhanced oculars, the jagged supernova head of the weapon blurred, a chronofield boiling around it. He was speeding himself up, his weapons up, creating a pocket of reality where time moved faster than... The jagged sun cut right past his obliterator and sheared through his upper left arm with a shriek of parting metal and a gush of sparks. It buried itself in his upper ribcage and kept cutting. Trazen felt it lodge in his central reactor. A flash. Battery acids and reactor fluid spouted in the air, flecks dotting Orican's leering death mask where they sizzled like oil on an engine. Trazen went down on one knee. Thus ended Trazen Cold Infinite, mocked Orican, twisting his staff deeper. Lord of Solemnes, keeper of trinkets, peerless in arrogance, Lord of Forgotten... And then he stopped, because the face before him was not Trazen, but a mere Lich-Guard. The obliterator swung from behind him, catching the diviner on his segmented backplates as he twisted to evade. It connected with a flash of searing light, a brightness so pure it overwhelmed Trazen's oculars, refracting and scattering in the lenses so the world disappeared for a moment, then snapped back, painted in prismatic rainbow hues. The blow took Orican off his feet and sent him crashing into a display case, shorting out the stasis field and denting the plinth with his shoulder plate. Ceramic ritual urns atop the plinth, their cracks, painstakingly hardened with period-correct resin, rocked and steadied. Trazen picked up the fallen puzzle box. I like to keep a spare body in this gallery, he chuckled. So much faster to stream my consciousness into it than come by barge. Translation can destabilize the stasis fields, you know. Orican tried to rise, legs twitching. Sparks crackled from his broken spine. So, my valued colleague, Trazen said, let's have a short symposium, shall we? You refer to this as the Astarium Mysterios, but surely you don't believe it's the real thing. Most likely a copy. A curiosity meant to represent the object of legend, yes? You don't know what you have... Orican's vocal emitters buzzed and skipped from the power overload, interrupting his crow-like voice. He pulled himself along the floor, hauling his crippled form upright so he leaned against the plinth, twitching legs trailing unnaturally to the side. Always a slave to the past. Even if you knew what it was, you wouldn't possess the vision to use it. Trazen opened his palm and cast a stasis field, pinning the diviner in place from the second vertebrae down. Slave to the past, a lack of vision. Perhaps, my dear astromancer, perhaps. Trazen tossed the puzzle box in the air and caught it again, delighting as Orican's monocular widened in distress. The casualness was feigned. He'd plotted the object's arc 200 times before making the throw, and put it gingerly into his dimensional pocket. But you are a slave to your visions, with no sense of the past. I suppose it is our natures, yes? My lot is to preserve, yours to predict. Oh, yes, I see you do not like that word, predict. No doubt you think it clumsy. Well, I have a prediction for you, dear Orican. He released his obliterator. It stood immobile, balanced on its pointed haft, and held a hand to his steely forehead, as if glimpsing the ethereal. A vision of your own future.
The glassy floor rumbled as ancient tomb doors grated open. Monoliths rose around the gallery, scraping against the time-worn slabs as they ground from their stasis chambers. Inside, each stood a sarcophagus niche, shrouded with milky green fog. The vapor washed heavily towards the floor, lit from within like storm clouds as animation systems crackled to life. And, as it sank, the fog revealed crested helms. Dispersion shields and bladed weapons stood ready in inert hands. A phalanx of lich guards, eye sockets dark.
"In my vision," Trazin continued, "I see you as a permanent addition to this gallery. You are, after all, a priceless antique, are you not? Orkan the Diviner, seer of the Necrontyr, maker of predictions, who warned our kind against accepting the Deceiver's horrific bargain."
He chuckled, raised the Astaria Mysterios.
"I think I'll put you somewhere where you can gaze on this, just out of reach, for eternity."
"The worst thing about biotransference," said Orkan, his voice recovering, "is that in the flesh times you at least stop to breathe every once in a while."
Trazin laughed.
"I've always envied your acid tongue."
He rapped the floor twice with his obliterator's haft.
"Perhaps I'll display it separately."
The Lich Guard's eyes flared as one, popping like fuses. They lowered long war scythes, snapped shields into position, and advanced. A contracting circle of metal closed on the diviner.
"You call me a predictor, Trazin," spat Orkan. "But mere prediction is no longer of use to me. What use are visions when the powerful refuse to heed them? You march to your doom, believing the deceiver's promises over my auguries. Why speak truth to those that choose to be death to it?"
Hyperphase blades, vibrating in and out of reality, drew closer around the diviner. Energy fields sizzled in the dry air of the hermetically sealed chamber. They were 30 steps away, then 20.
"Since you all turned your back on me, my powers have grown," said Orkan, "and I have changed my focus."
Trazin could see the astromancer's cranial coolants were running at triple capacity, beads of condensate plumping on his golden hood and running down to sizzle on his long skull.
"Why predict the future," said Orkan, "when I can reshape it?"
"How exactly?" said Trazin. Then to the Lich Guard, "Mind the artifacts."
"How else do you shape the future?"
Orkan said, a smile in his avian voice. He fixed Trazin with a stare.
"By destroying the past."
Trazin saw the blow just as Orkan's head twitched. He threw himself forward, shouting, on an interception trajectory he knew could not succeed. There was no way to be faster than a chronomancer. Orkan's head slammed backward into the plinth behind him. Metal dented and cracked. Levitator arrays shorted out. The eggshell-thin ceramics, rotating like a priceless constellation, dropped. The diviner spoke an arcane word that burst the stasis field and scrambled out of the way, hands clawing for purchase on the floor. Half-functioning feet launched him off the plinth, slamming the ground like pistons to drive himself forward, scrambling, then crawling. As he moved, his body superheated, welding damaged pieces together. Ghostly vapor twisted up from the severed vertebrae of his spine, cables seeking out each other like bloodworms sniffing for a mate. Trazin cared not. He dived for the falling relics, slowing his chronosense to try to make a decision. It was mathematically impossible to save them all, but one he could save, one priceless example of Necrontyr ceramic work. Working angles and probabilities, he chose a bright purple jar, Sortek, 4th Dynasty, a scene of the midsummer sky above the Necrontyr homeworld, a starfield shining through the glaze of twilight. It fell directly into the cup of his hands. So focused on it was he that Trazin could see the imprint of the potter's fingerprints beneath the bright paint. But Necron hands were not meant to handle such fine pottery. It contacted his palm and crushed inward, cracks shooting through it as if a summer lightning storm had split the sky of Trazin's half-forgotten home world. His chronosense dialed back to its slowest. Every moment of the jar's destruction played out in individual tragedies. Around him, ceramics fell like hail, scattering painted shards as they smashed against the floor.
Barbarian!
Trazin roared, his restoration protocols already running a damage analysis, matching potsherds by break pattern and sorting artistic styles as he shouted commands to the Lich Guard.
Nihayalak 12th Dynasty, kill him! Scott, 19th Dynasty, kill him! Ogdobek, 30th Dynasty, kill him!
Orokin called the fallen staff of tomorrow to his hand, as if it were a living thing. The first Lich Guard bore down on him before he could even stand. A mistake. Orokin scuttled backward like a crab, thrusting his staff at the Lich Guard's oculars. When the Tomb Guard raised his dispersion shield, the diviner scythed the staff in low, the blazing halo of its headpiece severing both legs at the ankles. As the guard fell, Orokin sprang to his feet, slamming the pointed haft of his staff into the fallen warrior's segmented throat. He shot an electrostatic discharge through the staff and overloaded the foe's neural matrix. The warrior's oculars, awakened after 60 million years of sleep, winked out. Orokin ducked, a war scythe passing a finger's span over his head. He kicked out backward, destabilizing the opponent, and broke off, dodging behind a display of gold-inlaid smoking pipes to buy himself a moment. The Lich Guard recovered and stalked towards him.
Idiot! The ceramics!
Shouted Trazin, hastily casting a stasis field around the ruined shards.
Watch where you step!
Lich Guard stalled, turned, went around. They stalked a wide perimeter outside the priceless debris field, their circular formation growing ragged, holes in the net developing as one group pressed in faster than the other. Orokin circled around the pipe display, keeping it between him and the closest guards, his back momentarily shielded by the broken ceramics.
Surrender the mysterious, Trazin, and this can end.
You have broken all covenants, Astromancer, all rules of protocol, destroyed the last examples of our world's...
Orokin planted his foot against the display and shoved. For a sickening instant, it creaked over like an axed tree, the racks of pipes held in impossible symmetry, until the stasis field gave out and they crashed down at the advancing Lich Guard's feet.
Stop!
Trazin pleaded. The ancient pipes shattered. Bowls that once held dream tar, husbanded in forgotten temple gardens, scattered broken amongst the feet of the Lich Guard, who froze mid-step, torn between the command to advance and the one that prevented them from damaging the artifacts. Orokin put his shoulder against a case of surgical instruments and heaved, grabbed a disintegrating scroll and threw it across the chamber like a streamer, completing his barrier of antiquities, his own warding circle of defacement. The Lich Guard halted, awaiting orders.
If you wish to treat with me, scribe, sneered Orokin, come inside.
Trazin obliged, vaulting the debris, channeling power through to his leap, his obliterator swinging down like a great hammer. It drove down on Orokin's staff, the iron clang of their meeting echoing off the walls. For an instant, the lodestones of their weapons touched, sizzling and popping like power cables in water. Trazin shoved the diviner backward with the haft of his obliterator. Then the staffs swirled and clashed again, wheeling so fast that they left spectral fans of energy in their wake.
Vandal!
Trazin roared, thrusting his obliterator like a spear.
You have destroyed objects made by craftsmen dead long before we breathed. Pieces of our past that can never be remade.
Orokin parried, rolling the blow upward and leaping sideways to avoid the downward chop that followed it.
Useless things. Fetishes of a vanished past.
Trazin reversed his obliterator and slapped the staff into Orokin's side, staggering the diviner. The chronomancer backpedaled, wisps of radioactive aura twisting from the burn in his lower thorax. Trazin came on again, his fury burning. Circuits flared hot. Viscous electrofluid pumped through his systems like magma. Neither of them were warriors. For Trazin, the dust of the archive was more familiar than that of the parade ground, and Orokin had spent eons training his mind and neglecting his body. Had this duel occurred during the flesh times, it would have been comical. Two withered ancients, rangy, round-shouldered, stained with ink and smelling of incense, tearing at each other with barely the strength to bruise. But biotransference had, for all its horrors, made every Necron an armoured juggernaut. The two swung at each other, filling the gallery with the sounds of the forge. They locked weapons, shoved and bashed their plated skulls like horned beasts. The Lich Guard looked on, impassive. They knew an aristocratic duel when they saw it, though none had seen one quite like this. Orokin broke away, whirling.
Give me the mysterious Trazin.
I will tear you! Orokin sent the Staff of Tomorrow spinning end over end across the chamber, its head burning the air so it left the after-image of a discus as it scythed into a case of antiquities.
No!
Trazin smashed the obliterator down, and the diviner met it with the logarithm of Sulit, conjuring a swirl of ochre void that he wielded like a buckler. Incompatible realities clashed, the solar flare of the ancient weapon meeting the lightless ether in a backfire that extinguished the tiny portal and threw the obliterator from Trazin's grip. Such was his fury, he cared not. Trazin leapt upon the astromancer and beat him with bare fists. Each clashing blow left imprints on the living metal of Orokin's necrodermis. Orokin tried to scuttle out from under the archivist, but Trazin grabbed a string of ritual tiles and dragged him back so roughly that one tile sheared off in his grasp. Alarm gongs and trumpet klaxons filled the air. Swarms of restoration scarabs crawled down the walls like curtains, their auto-instinctual protocols calling them to preserve the scene. Trazin saw none of it. His oculars were deep focused on Orokin, fists slamming down over and over, sparks showering from each blow. The diviner laughed. Bodies as resilient as theirs could do little damage without the aid of phase weapons and flares. Yet Trazin kept hammering, beating the diviner into the floor until he felt weak. No, he was weak. Only then did he notice the diviner's questing tail wrapped around his throat, closing off his cable artery, pinching off the coolant that kept his neurals from overheating.
Barbarian,
Trazin said, rolling to the side, his anger spent. Orokin sprang to his feet, ready, called his staff.
This can end, Archivist, he crowed. Surrender the mysterious, and it will stop.
Trazin struggled to his feet, metallic dust from the pulverized floor shaking loose from his scaled cloak.
Is it truly worth so much, Orokin?
He spread a hand at the destruction.
What it is worth to me is immaterial, said Orokin. The question is, what is it worth to you? Is it worth every object in this gallery? Because I am willing to pull this chamber in upon itself, if that is what is required.
Our heritage, our legacy.
If it is so important, sacrifice one to save all.
Trazin wiped his hands together, a nervous habit from a time long ago. So long ago, when they were eternally stained with ink. Calculations whirled in his matrices. If/then logic problems created and discarded. If he orders the Lich Guard to advance, the artifacts become irrecoverable, and Orokin destroys the gallery. No. If he attacks Orokin, then Orokin continues this rampage. No. If he gives up the Astarium Mysterios, Trazin slid long fingers into his dimensional pocket and withdrew the Mysterios. Such a small thing. Insignificant, really. A curiosity. A replica of a mythical object that never existed. At least, he had assumed so. Orokin clearly thought different.
"A bargain," said Trazin. His voice had a tinge of desperation, so alien that he saw two of the more sentient Lich Guards exchange a glance. "You are a chronomancer, perhaps the greatest of your kind. You can undo this destruction. It would be nothing for you."
Orokin paused, considering.
"I can?" "Then do it. First, hand over the device." "I am not a simpleton, diviner."
Orokin spread his hands.
"You have me surrounded. Once restored, you may resume your interest in my, preservation. Shall I give away my one point of leverage so easily?"
Trazin hesitated, stepped forward. Orokin withdrew a step. Trazin placed the puzzle box on the ground, as carefully as if it were a newborn, and stepped back.
"Now your part," he said.
Orokin's eye narrowed, and for a microsecond, Trazin thought he detected regret in that gaze. He did not step forward to take the device.
"The difficulty, Trazin, is that undoing the damage means traveling back in the timeline before all this occurred."
He met Trazin's gaze.
"And if I did that, you would have no memory of this accord."
Trazin saw the transdimensional beamer, knew what it meant. Canoptic wraiths used them to banish unwanted construction debris into extra-dimensional space, a large-scale version of the pocket dimension he kept at his own hip. Orokin's snapshot caught the Mysterios, lancing it out of existence, sending it somewhere in the great nowhere. Trazin dived for Orokin as the diviner turned the sidearm on himself. By the time Trazin's hands got there, nothing occupied the space but empty air. Trazin the Infinite, archivist of the Solemnes Galleries, stood in the center of his ruined past and howled for revenge. Chapter 4. Nepereth.
"Do not mourn if I am slain. Instead, entomb me like the pharaohs of old. Not in a high ziggurat, but in a vault below flat ground, covered by sand, where no questing eye shall find my bones. Raise no stele, and carve no inscription, save one. In this tomb rests a true son of the Necrontyr, unmarked by its corruption. Open and be damned."
War in Heaven. Act 3, Scene 2, Line 1. Solemnes was famous for its galleries, sweeping reconstructions of battles, titanic heroes preserved in hard light, recreations of history's greatest moments. Even before the Great Sleep, Trazin had entertained visitors from nearly every dynasty with his collection of wonders. What was less known was that it also contained one of the greatest document collections in the galaxy, a rival to even the Aldari's fabled Black Library. Trazin, after all, had once been a chronicler and archivist. Though artifacts were his passion, he did not neglect the written word. It was not a project that required his close attention. He handled acquisitions, of course, for that was the most interesting part. But the rest he delegated to cryptech scribes, who catalogued, cross-referenced and digitized each work. Trazin hoped that in another 10 millennia, when the Necron legions were destined to awaken, all of their literature, history and discourses would be accessible, a mnemonic copy sent to the library of each tomb world. A great work for the benefit of all. Trazin liked great works. Indeed, he had been awake far longer than even the handful of his early risen kin, and had learned quickly that lofty pursuits were an essential component to immortality. A Necron overlord's greatest enemy was not the savage orcs, the grasping humans, or the cunning Eldari. Boredom was the greatest foe, one that must be continually battled lest madness or despondency set in. So he had his gallery and his holographic archive, ready to gift once his kin arose. And besides, if all the tomb worlds had their own archives, no researchers would come to muck about in his. Nobody touching his precious manuscripts or asking obnoxious questions. Trazyn was not feeling charitable as he stalked down into the depths of Solemnes, past his restoration rooms and extensive wine cellar. He approached the carved wooden doors of the library, warm and inviting, and threw them open with a shove that stressed the hinges. His fury, though terrible, was always brief. Trazyn did not burn hot for long. His anger was cold and dry, like the desert night. A focused, lasting anger, both practical and useful. Shelves reached to the ceiling. Rotating cradles, like the side wheels of great river barges, held arcane tomes and scrolls. Cryptecs paused in their copying, stunned.
"I require assistance," he said. "Then solitude."
"Of course, my lord,"
said the chief librarian.
"Is this about the proposed expansion?"
"The what?"
The cryptech bowed, obsequious.
"The stacks are full, my lord. We are over capacity. I have humbly suggested that we expand the collection into the space currently occupied by the wine cellars."
"But then, where would I put my wine, librarian?"
You do not drink wine, my lord."
"Of course I don't," Trazyn snapped. "It's far too valuable. Request denied. Enlist excavation race to dig another chamber.
"My lord."
And bring me everything you have about the War in Heaven, Fair on Nepereth, and the Astarium Mysterious. I want the physical manuscripts."
"Quite an eclectic subject, Lord Archivist."
He called up a Foscliffe panel and ran a text scry.
"In addition to the larger works, there are many small references in various mediums that need special handling and transport. There are sheet gold scrolls, foundation stele, platinum slab tablets."
"Everything,"
Trazyn said, in a tone that did not brook dissent.
"Bring it all, then go away. I will be some time."
"Yes, sire."
"But first, bring me the legal code, the volumes on interdynastic theft and trials."
"Oh, is there to be a trial, my lord?"
"Oh, yes,"
said Trazyn, fingering the ritual tile he had ripped from Oricon's frame.
"There most certainly will be."
Mandragora, Eastern Fringe, 9 standard years later. Mandragora the Golden, Mandragora of the Emerald Skies, Mandragora, dynastic seat of the mighty Sortek. Oricon despised it, even now, even as he'd exited the Dolmen Gate, the scars of his perilous journey fresh on his necrodermis. He could not help but release his venom.
Land of whisperers and sycophants. I should have stayed with Drukhari.
Once the third most powerful dynasty in the Necron Empire, the crown world of the Sortek was a dead place. Great sand dunes drifted against its ziggurats and palaces, burying them beneath golden cascades that mocked its grand title. Windstorms scoured its monuments with the planet's abrasive silica grains, stripping the gilded sepulchres and obelisks to their living metal interior, and giving the entire city, or what one could see of it, the appearance of brushed steel. A few districts retained their grandeur, sheltered in the lee of great stasis tombs, and spared the caustic attentions of wind-blown sand. There, statues of ancient pharaohs still stared imperious over the desert, faces distinct and spared the weathering of less fortunate monuments. There, the few hundred awakened members of the Sortek dynasty lived a pantomime existence. Accidental custodians of the silent necropolis awakened 10,000 years too early, busying themselves, taking care of a world that was largely self-sufficient. waiting for the distant day when the countless billions of sleepers would emerge. Orokin stayed well away from those districts. Before the Great Sleep, he found Mandragora oppressive. So many beings milling, clamouring, constantly interrupting. Constant politics. Petty creatures struggling for petty victories. It had been a difficult place to focus. Even achieving a basic chronotrance required shutting the world out with slab-thick walls in his astromantic observatory. Perched on the humped mountain, overlooking the city, and above its sky-erasing glow. Yet, maintaining a presence was necessary. Personal preferences aside, Mandragora was the Sortek power center, and Orokin could not be a court astromancer from his hermitage on Rithcairn, more's the pity. But Mandragora had much to recommend itself in these strange days. A stable dolmen gate to access the webway, the quiet dark of a dead, sterile metropolis, and of course, an automated defense grid that was the best in the Empire. Just the sort of thing you need if you've stolen from one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Using the transdimensional beamer had been a desperate task, little better than casting lots. He'd adjusted